Well, especially when you're not having these groups assimilate. They're not embracing French values. They're not assimilating. They've got great hostility towards the nation they've migrated to, and sometimes these hostilities last several generations. And yet, despite this violence, which is well beyond Paris, it's in several centres throughout the country, we had Macron dancing away. Was he at an Elton John concert? What's happening there? I mean, what sort of a message does that send? Your country's burning and you're having a little boogie at some, Is Elton John still touring? I thought he had his final tour. I think that was
It's a bit like John Farnham. There's a final one, then there's a final one after the final one. Esther.
Yeah. I don't really, well, the optics of Macron at a party when his country's literally running down is terrible. You remember this is the second time he's had to cancel a trip outside of the country because of riots. The last time we were seeing riots in Paris, now we're seeing it all over the country. So Macron is not having a very easy year. And yes, the optics of him being out partying while his country is literally on fire is terrible. But the reality is, these kinds of situations happen when you choose to ignore it. You hit the nail on the head, Rita, when you talked about assimilation and actually integrating into a country where you actually stand for and identify with its values and its ideals. Look, we have many conversations about multiculturalism here in the UK, particularly when we talk about, how much do we tolerate if it's going to go against our own values. But really, the French could take a leaf out of the Brits' books, because at the very least, we have a conversation about it. We have a conversation about what it means to be British, what values you have to sign up to be here. And then, what people are not compatible with those values. As difficult as it is, we do have those conversations. In France, it just does not happen.
Yeah, exactly.
They just say you are French and therefore we don't collect any data. But you have to really get to the heart of what it means to be French and what your values are.
Exactly. Well, France has always refused to go down the assimilation route. It's a strange, the way these problems go back decades, and they've refused. They've had an underclass living there in the banlieue, and now they're going to reap the whirlwind. Esther, really want to ask you quickly before we go about Nigel Farage, Toby Young and others, and the bank accounts. So this is an unbelievable story. Just quickly going to play you this grab of Nigel Farage. That basically the bank he was with took away his account because they don't like his attitude on Brexit, and he's been to 7 other banks, I gather, and they won't give him an account either. This is insane, and Nigel's threatening to leave Britain. Have a listen.
2 months ago, I get a phone call out of the blue from a personal manager who simply says on a phone call, "We are closing your accounts." I asked why. No reason was given. I was told it would all be explained in a letter that would arrive in a couple of days' time. So I've tried for 2 months to get another bank account. And I've spoken to 7 different banks, and they've all said no. And the reason is, it would seem to be political.
So, Esther, what on earth is going on?
Yes, the unpersoning of Nigel Farage. It's actually quite a scary situation. I'd also like to point out that he stated that his family as well, close family members of his have also had their bank accounts cancelled. Now, whenever we hear about people's bank accounts being cancelled, we think of the Canadian truckers whose bank accounts were effectively cancelled because they were going against the state, which is just the stuff of nightmares. In the case of Nigel Farage, obviously it's very worrying. So far today, what we know is the bank hasn't really given any in-depth explanations, and they've been doing this other high-profile political figures as well. Former MEP, friend of his, he said, has also had her bank account cancelled. And now it's important to remember that this is not an isolated case. So you've had actually many individuals that don't necessarily have links to political parties per se, or as blatant as Nigel Farage, or political movements that have also had their bank accounts cancelled. But it's difficult to draw the distinction between that and what's happening with Nigel Farage, because in their cases they suspect that the banks are actually investigating their accounts, because banks have a duty to check whether you're getting funds from dodgy sources. There've been all sorts of embargoes and bans placed on anything coming from Russia, for instance. So that might be linked. It's still unclear. But we do know for now, with the limited information we can go off of, is what's happening to Nigel Farage is very, very curious, especially because it's been extended to his family members, who I don't understand why that's the case for them either. We obviously have to wait and see what these banks say, but so far he's been turned away by 7 banks in the UK. So clearly it's a concerted effort.
Well, it's terrifying, Esther, and Nigel should be with us next week here in the studio. In the meantime, Esther, thanks so much for staying up so late to chat to us from London. Always great to see you.